G'day, how you going? Just thought I'd do a video this morning. What I'm going to do today is look at this book. I've just finished reading it. Johann Hari, Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention. I'm just going to do a little bit of review of it. It was a book that I read. I found it really, really interesting, and it really does talk about what it is on the cover in terms of stolen attention and how we're losing that. There's a lot of talk about kids with ADHD. I can never get those right. And that talks a little bit about that, why that is on the rise, but also just general things around what this lack of attention can actually be doing to us, and how we're sort of feeling out. So I think it's a really valuable read for anybody who's been sort of feeling like they just don't seem to be getting anywhere, who don't seem to sort of feel like there's anything of a really good nature for them. They can't seem to achieve things. They can't seem to get anywhere. They sort of struggle to say focused on things. And I'll talk about these towards the end. There is quite a few little tips that he puts in there that are really quite interesting. But he has sort of a few things that he really talks about. Obviously, social media is one thing that he talks about, is social media sort of stealing our focus. And yes and no, there are things there that you can do, but there are also things that you can do to remove that as a thing, and they're really onuses on us. I think he also looks at what our individual focus is then stealing from our world as a whole as well. So he makes reference to the fact that, in the late 80s or something like that, there was this whole worry about the ozone layer having a hole in it. And then people as a group banded together to get governments to change, because it was linked to PCBs in the aerosols and stuff like that. And so that was a radical change that happened within, the world. And he's linking that to the moment, to also to things like, climate change and all of those sort of things, that at that point in time, we were able collectively to focus together as as a group, as a species. But now, through all of our inability to focus, we're not being able to have that same sort of sense of clarity of bringing everybody together to really focus the mind on tackling climate change. And I'm not making this into a climate change video or anything like that, but it's interesting how those two things have been linked, because here was a really big example of something that we were really concerned with, and then as a species we were able to really understand what the science said, understand what was really the problem, focus our global attention on it, and make people change. And that's what we need to do now. But because we have a lack of individual focus, we're then not quite able to do that. And that's sort of like towards the end of the book. But there are quite a lot of things that he talks about. He also talks about the education system, how a lot of kids are unable to focus in education, and so they're labelled, and so they're giving stimulants and stuff like that to help them to focus. Where it may be more about how we're doing that. There's a lot of evidence out there, and one of the things that I love about Johann Hari is he is taking a lot of time to look at the evidence, to talk with scientists, to talk with investigators, to talk with anybody, to get not only, a view that might, support what he's saying, but also to get the contrary view as well. So there's a lot of information. And I'll give you an example of this. He talks to some people where, talking about social media, where, this is the social media's company's problem. They should make it easier for us to be able to remove ourselves from social media. And then in there's also a secondary person that he talks to, that he talks quite a lot to, who sort of says, well, no, it's social media is doing stuff. There is ways of removing notifications to remove. So they're doing stuff to do that, but it's really it's in our own interest to maybe not launch social media. So it's not so much about social media as a whole, but it's also our ability to sort of say no. and not to do this or not to give it to kids or so on and so forth. So he does have both those views in there as well. So I think from that sort of point of view, it's a very interesting book because it tackles this real issue around that paying attention. And back to the talk about education. There's a lot of evidence that's talking about free play, as they call it. So allowing kids to learn through play. And I found that quite interesting because I remember when my own childhood, I'd go off, just get on my bike and ride off into the sunset nearly, and end of the day I'd be back and I'd just turn up for tea. I probably had lunch somewhere else, and I would have been out in the bush with some of my mates building cubby houses, building things. And I remember one time we built this huge underground chamber and covered it, and so it looked exactly like it had, and that took us weeks to build. But there was a lot of how do we do this? How do we build? There was 3 of us building this. Some people wanted to build it a certain way, and so on and so forth. So there was a lot of compromising, a lot of discussion, and I think back on that now with my own children and how we potentially had sort of truncated how they view. We weren't sort of so interested about allowing them to go out and do stuff themselves as an explorer and so on, and always hovering, the idea of the hover parent and stuff like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are looking to keep our kids safe, and we are looking to make sure that they learn in an appropriate way. But there's a lot of evidence out there that sort of says, if we're teaching every child the same way, then they're potentially not interested in what we're teaching them. Whereas if we allow them to do free play, they will find their own things that they're interested in, and they will still learn the stuff that they want to learn, and they will still learn the things, because in the end, if you take something like reading, in the end, everything that we need to learn is reading. But if you find something that you're fascinated in, you will take the effort to learn to read, to be able to read that stuff that you're fascinated. So if you're interested in astronomy, look at the stars as much as you want, but you need to read the books to understand what those stars signify and who found them and what they belong to in terms of constellations and all of that sort of stuff. So in the end, you will want to read. So it's a fascinating book. It talks about different things that are affecting our concentration and our ability to focus. And it also talks about, a little bit about what you could do. But he leaves it very open because as he sort of says towards the end, this is not a self-help book. I'm not going to tell you how to get your attention back, but he tells you a little bit about some of the things that you can do and sort of really sort of bring that back. So, in that book, and I'm just going to paraphrase pretty much what he says, some of the stuff that he was talking about was trying to get off a social media. So he now sort of puts a clock timer on his phone to sort of say, okay, you can only look at certain things for a certain amount of time, and then the phone disconnects from the internet. He also has a jar where he sort of says, okay, well, at some stage per day, I just want to not have my phone around me at all, so I can do really focused work. So he's a writer, obviously. I do some writing myself, so I understand that sometimes you just need focus on that particular topic and that particular skill. So he has a jar which you can put in the amount of time he wants that phone to be locked away, and he sort of puts in 60 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 hours, whatever it happens to be, and then the jar won't be allowed to be opened until that point in time. So it's forced stuff, but it is also this idea of forming these habits so that you get better. He also limits the time he has on social media, and he makes sure that he controls what he looks at. So he's not allowing the social media to select things for him. He's actually going in there for specific topics and looking at specific things. So it's not just allowing it to trend away and suddenly he's lost an hour or so. He's really going there for a specific idea and a specific topic. So he's doing those sort of things. He's also making sure that his email is just up for a certain amount of time a day. He looks at it and then that's it. So these are really good, simple tips that you can use. And I sort of think, in terms of this book, really fascinating read about where our society is going and what it's doing. And I think just, like I've read his other one, which was Lost Connections. That was really good for mental health. This one's really good about focus and really making sure you do those. So those tips, really good. They're in his book. I would recommend reading those and a lot of the other stuff that's in there. And I've only just scratched the surface in this 10 minutes. So hopefully you have a look and you find that really interesting, because I certainly did. Thank you.